Good morning. I'm Steve Weber, and I'm the host of the American Gumption Morning Show. And welcome to Christmas week, December 21st, show number 94. Yeah, pretty exciting stuff. Alrighty, so today I have Joe Lair going to be joining us at about 10, 15 minutes from now. And Joe is a storyteller, and he told a story several years ago that made a pretty profound impact on my life, and we'll get into all that. But his story is front yard, backyard. So that story is coming up today with Joe in about 10, 12 minutes from now. Alrighty, so today, let's see. I'm going to do a monologue, and I'm going to do it. My monologue is going to be on storytelling. So I always try to tie in something to do with what my guest is going to be. Joe's a storyteller, so I'm just going to give some of my thoughts on storytelling, some of the things I've learned, and some of the things I haven't learned yet. So anyway, I'll share that with you. Now, let me tell you what's happening this week. So this is going to be a short week. I'm going to do a live show Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm not going to do a show on Thursday and Friday, Christmas Eve and Christmas. Then I'll be back next week, and I'll do 4 shows Monday through Thursday. So that's kind of the schedule coming up for the Christmas week. And let's see, on tomorrow, I have Shaman Isabella coming back for the second time. She was here a couple of weeks ago, and we got into the metaphysical, and we have a lot to talk about. So that's going to be a fun story. That's going to be a fun show. And I'm excited that Shaman Isabella will be returning. The first time we really kind of went through her whole story. So there'll be a link in tomorrow's show to that original one, but we're just going to pick up where we left off and continue the story. Wednesday, Nikki Roscoe returns to the American Gumption Show one more time, and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, will be on the agenda and the topic for that Christmas show. And there's also going to be some Christmas music that you promised to bring us. All right, so that'll be this week. And then next week on Monday, our Tuesday motivation, simple motivation, Brandon Schaefer, he's going to spend the whole show with me, and we'll talk about inspiration, motivation, we'll talk about tech. We're going to go through all of that. That's on Monday. And then on Tuesday, Della Fatui, a lovely woman I met who lives up in the Toronto area. And she is actually a broadcaster, kind of like what I'm doing here. And so she's got 5 different shows that she does. So she's going to join us. So that's going to be next Tuesday after we take a little 4-day break for Christmas coming up. Again, no show on Thursday, no live show on Thursday, Friday. I don't even think there's a way to do a scheduled show, but I haven't figured that out yet. So anyway, that's what's happening. All righty, now let's go ahead and jump into the monologue today, and it's going to be storytelling. So Forrest Gump, the movie, was a story, right? That's what all movies are, is they're stories. And some of them are good stories and some of them are not so good stories. Turned out that Forrest Gump was a movie was a pretty good story. Now, interestingly, Forrest Gump, the character in the movie, he was a storyteller, because what he did was he sat on the bench and he just told his life story to all the people who came and sat down with him as he was waiting for the bus, and other people came by to the bus stop. And essentially, the entire movie is kind of a flashback of him telling his life story from the bench. All right, pretty clever the way they figured out how to do that. The very end of the last 20 minutes of the movie kind of goes into real time when, Forrest jumps up off the bench and runs down to Jenny's apartment, and then, they get reacquainted, and she finds out he's a father, and Jenny and little Forrest move back to Greenbow, Alabama with him. All right, so that's the story there. Now, stories are powerful because we remember them, right? If a story is something that you can it has like these characters, and it has some kind of suspense and drama, and it builds up, and then there's resolution, and then there's a conclusion. And that's just sort of off the top of my head. But stories, you can remember them. Now, when you sit in a classroom or you sit on a Zoom call, maybe, maybe not quite as interesting because, there's probably a lot more facts and there's information, and they're not necessarily being told, it's not a Hollywood script. It's not, it's just an average person who's trying to do business and get something done. And so they're throwing out these different things, not quite as memorable, not quite as interesting. And again, classrooms, how many, it's been a long time since I've attended school, but certainly I've been a student these last multiple years, learning. And so always when there's a story involved, it's easier to remember, as opposed to when it's just sort of like, facts and figures. It's like, it's hard to remember, and then one of the things that I remember from, as a child, you had the history, history wasn't fun because, you had to memorize the date that Christopher Columbus sailed and left and discovered America, 1492. You remember those things and you learned them, but there wasn't necessarily a story involved. It was just sort of like these facts that you tried to remember and not quite so good. All right. So, but again, stories we can remember. The other thing about stories is that they give people permission to think about their own lives in a way that, facts and figures don't. And I learned this by being just by being who I am the last multiple years. And, 2009 was the year I went through a lot of personal development work, and I started opening up a bit more and sharing some of my own personal stories. And I remember I would do what was some kind of a share with somebody. And I was like, there was some nervousness and there was some vulnerability on my part where I'm sharing it. And I discovered that people would instantly or almost immediately not say anything about my story, but they would go and share something personal about themselves. And when that happened the first few times, it kind of surprised me. And I was like, oh my gosh, you didn't even listen to my story. And, but what I realized is that it was giving by me being open and sharing, it was giving other people permission to, be a little more vulnerable and be a little bit more open and sharing. And it wasn't like they weren't listening to my story. They were listening, but it was triggering something in their head that said, hey, I had a similar experience. I did something that same way. And then they went ahead and they would share it. So it did really two things. It triggered a part of their life, and then it gave them permission to share that too. And that was pretty cool. That was like a profound, I wasn't expecting that. That just happened. And it kind of, whoa, that's really neat. That's really neat. All right. The other thing I learned from speaking over these last 10 years, and again, this kind of happened early on, is I approached it from kind of a overthinking idea the first few years. And I wanted to present facts and figures. And, I told lots of stories about the movie, and I invented the idea of gumption and personal responsibility and the way you think, the way you act, and the way you interact with others. And I'd go through and I'd tell this whole thing. And I think I'd be pretty clever sharing this with an audience. And then I'd say, is there any questions? And they'd say, have you ever met Tom Hanks? That was always the number one question people wanted to know. And so here I am telling all about gumption and personal responsibility. And then any questions? And they're like, hey, have you ever met Tom Hanks? It was just kind of funny because they want to know stories. They want to know something that's memorable. They don't want necessarily facts and figures. So then how do you take facts and figures and mix them in with the stories so that people can kind of learn and have an aha moment? And, but it's interesting and it becomes memorable. And of course, that's the trick. That's the whole trick to storytelling. Now, there was a keynote speaker that I heard several years ago, and he spoke for an hour, and all he did was tell 3 stories. Everybody could remember all 3 of the stories and the gist of all 3 of the stories. And they all took about 20 minutes each. And they were all in this great detail of it was silliness in terms of the story. And yet there was a message involved with it, and there was something profound in what he did. And he brought people in, and they were like sitting on the edge of their chair and they were listening. And it was just this, I mean, on the surface, it seemed like almost like a dim-witted story about, the adventures or travels of this guy. And yet there was a profound message behind it. And it just went on. So here he stood up on stage for an hour, told 3 stories, boop, went off stage, gone. But how impactful was that? Again, so stories, no facts and figures, no slides, no PowerPoint, no data, just story. So anyway, that was pretty cool. When I saw that, and again, I had been far enough in my journey to be able to appreciate that and understand what was going on. So I'm watching this storytelling. So stories really can be like a framework for teaching and for giving others permission, and then connecting on a personal level with somebody. Now, interestingly, so this is almost, coming close to the end of the 5th month, 4.5 months of broadcasting. What did I say? Show number 94. All right. So starts in August, 20 shows a month. The first couple of months, at least 2, maybe to 2.5, I was doing all of my monologues were always like a story that I knew very, very well. And I've been telling for the last 10 years. And I would just go, I'll tell this story today. And somewhere in that 2 to 3 month time frame, a switch went off, and I went, my monologues, can now take on a different flavor to them. And I started preparing them. Usually that morning I'd wake up and I'd sort of go, okay, who's my guest and what do I want to talk about? And I would just take, a piece of paper, and I just got kind of a format, and I just start jotting down ideas, and that would become my script for the story. And what that did was it forced me to, become more in the moment and present and creative on a day in and day out basis, because I was essentially making up a new story or telling a new story. Now, these aren't these aren't things that I don't know anything about, that I have to do a lot of research on. Storytelling is something that's been part of my life for all my life. And then I went through the phase where I crafted an hour-long keynote to tell a long story. And so all of those early monologues that I did were really like little tiny pieces of that and stories that I included in those, but they were safe stories. They were things that I did. So then a couple of months ago, like after, a few months of doing the show, I thought, the monologues can be something a little more present, and I can make them up each day, or I can, kind of craft them. And I didn't even know that I started it this way, but it just turned out that for whoever the guest was, I would get some kind of inspiration from what they were going to talk about, and I would just tell a piece of the story from there. So that's sort of how this whole thing has evolved. I feel a lot of gratitude that I'm able to come here every day, and that you guys are out there listening and we're participating, and it's fun. I appreciate that very much. And it's given me lots of opportunity, to practice and to get better at speaking and, taking my thoughts and then explaining them in a way that hopefully makes sense. I've never done a storytelling seminar or webinar, or, I've never taught one. I've never attended one per se, where I went in and said, okay, this is how you do storytelling. There are people that's what they do. They teach the craft of storytelling. And so I think about that, and I'm subscribed to several of them, and they announce, before COVID, they would announce like, okay, we're meeting in North Carolina and next month, and here's the information if you want to come and join us, and it's like a 2-day or 3-day seminar or get together where someone teaches you the craft of telling a story. That's something that would be interesting. That's something that I would think I would benefit from and I'd enjoy. Or maybe I should just invite those people to come on and be my guest, and I can learn that way too. So anyway, maybe we'll do that. Alrighty, that's really it for the storytelling portion of today's monologue, and I it's just kind of fun to throw out these ideas, and it helps me, and hopefully there's some benefit to you folks too. Alrighty, now let's go ahead. I see our guest is in the green room. He looks like he's ready to go. Hopefully they've been taking care of him back there. Let's organize myself. Joe Lair, are you there?
I am here, Steve. Good.
Hi, Joe. Welcome. Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm alive, so I'm really grateful to be here.
Good. Yes, you're a little bit earlier than I am. You are in Montana, where I lived for like 11 or 12 years, and now I'm back on the East Coast. So it's 10:15 my time, but a little bit earlier for you. So thanks for getting up and joining us.
No, very grateful to be here, Steve. Always grateful.
Hey, so Joe, there's two rules at the beginning of the guest interview portion.
Did I break one? I broke one already?
Well, the first one's you don't have to do anything other than just sit there and kind of pay attention, because I like to read a little intro and bio on who the guest is. And so that part should be fairly easy for you to do. And then the second part's easy too, because I have a theme song that I play anytime a guest is a first-time guest. So if you ever come back, like next year we have you back, we won't play the song because it's only for the very first time that you.
Okay, let's go.
Are you down for all of this?
I'm ready.
All righty. So Joe Lair has a passion for writing and public speaking. That combination has made him a storyteller. Joe is a founding member of Montana's speaker group and has been active in Toastmasters over the years. Joe and I met shortly after I moved to Montana. Technically, we didn't actually meet because Zoom didn't even exist back then.
That's true.
But we learned of each other, and for some unexplained reason, actually, it's a very explainable reason, but I'm going to leave it as, for some unexplained reason, we stayed connected for several years until we actually met in person. When we finally met, I heard Joe tell the front yard, backyard story. Initially, I thought it was his father's story. Now, for many years, Joe's father worked the circuit as a trainer and motivational speaker with the likes of Zig Ziglar and other founding members of today's National Speakers Association. He was like kind of like one of those, he was hanging out with all the legend guys back then.
Yes, he was.
Good stuff. And then, but about 2 years ago, I learned that front yard, backyard, which was Joe's father's signature story, was actually written by Joe. My goodness. We're gonna find out all about that. Joe continues to write articles for online magazines and websites. He's been published in the Chicken Soup for the Souls series books. That's pretty impressive. And Joe has been a mentor for aspiring writers and speakers, and he's mentored me over the years. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Joe has been actively involved in the world of recovery, teaching DUI classes, counseling chemical and drug offenders. He's led large groups, family and individual counseling sessions. And Joe has participated in interventions for individuals and families in need. Joe's day job is he serves as a property manager in Bozeman, Montana. We all have to have day jobs. Well, I'm trying not to have a day job. I'm trying to just do this. So we'll see how all that works out. Anyway, Joe Lair, welcome to the American Gumption Morning Show. Appreciate your joining us.
Thank you.
Let's play that song.
Oh, good.
Yeah, here we go. Have you ever
Thank you.
have you ever had a marching band welcome you to a show before?
No, sir, I've never had that.
Or well, here at American Gumption, we do things a little bit differently. So anyway, great. Glad you're here. Thank you. Joe, what so 4 years ago today, I decided that I was going to begin to live a different life. I was going to live alcohol free going forward, and and it's the whole idea of sobriety and giving up alcohol. For me, it's like it's not like the major focus of my life, because it just was like a bad habit that I had for a long time, and I was definitely like I tried a million times to quit or to moderate or to slow down or to somehow, and I just couldn't quite do it. And then finally, I got to the point where I kind of just had enough, and I went, okay, I'm done with this. But what I did was I quit for just a short time. I said, I'm just going to take a break. So I didn't say I'm quitting, for good. I just said, I'm going to take a break. And then what happened was like a week went by, and then a second week went by, and it just got easier. And in about a month, I like suddenly realized I was like a little bit healthier. I felt better. And then at about 4 months, 3 months, 4 months, I woke up one morning and I went, oh my God, I've been sleeping really good. I hadn't slept good in years, And so like I saw the physical connection and the change that occurred. And then it was like, okay, I'm going to go to 6 months. Okay, I'm going to go to a year. And then at a year, I said, I'm going to go to my 60th birthday, which was another 6 months. And then I just kind of got to the point where I went, you know what? It's like that was something I used to do, but I don't do anymore. So anyway, so today's today, 4 years.
Congrats. It's so amazing, isn't it? Staying stopped is awesome.
Yeah. It doesn't even feel like, for me, it doesn't even feel like, it sort of just feels like that used to be the way it was. And now that feels like this is the way it is. So, but here's the point of all this and why I really am grateful that you joined us today. Front Yard, Backyard, the story showed up at exactly the right time for me, because I had, for 20 years, I knew that it wasn't a healthy habit. It was a bad habit. It was like one of those things that, and I was addicted. I couldn't moderate and quit. The moderation thing was what a silly idea. You look back on that and you go, well, that never really worked. And yet I told myself that over and over again. Oh, I can do that. But anyway, Front Yard, Backyard hit me right when I was like at that moment when it needed to be. And maybe it was like kind of like holding up the mirror that I needed to, like look at myself. So tell us about Front Yard, Backyard. Maybe go through the story. Just to let it hang out.
What happened was a long time ago when I was a kid, we were traveling. My parents, we met some people. We went back and re-met them again when I was in my early teens. And he was living on an Air Force base. I can't remember if it was Spokane or somewhere. And that driving to that Air Force base, every single front yard was immaculate, beautiful. We got to Fred's place where his wife was living, and the backyard was made for his kids. It was a mess. It was complete chaos. It was a lot of fun. There were swing sets, cartwheel, everything, sandboxes. The backyard was a mess. And my dad asked Fred, he said, why? And he said, well, Army base, all they ever do is drive down the road. They only care about the front yard. They do not care about the backyard. And that's what I carried with me for a long time. It's like, okay, how is my backyard doing? How many weeds? How many thick, thistles? How many prickly pear roses are there? All that stuff. And like you're saying, the mirror of other people. When you, in that monologue, you're talking about people would just start to share with you, and they'd hold up a mirror saying, hey, this is me. And you'd hold up a mirror saying, well, this is me. And how deep do you want to go? Unfortunately, being around me, you've learned. I like the excavators, the big 3 to 6 foot buckets of excavating. That's what I like. and I dig deep quick. And that's up to you. You know, if you want to take the message and go deep, that's your choice. Like the stories allow you to do that. And that's why I love stories. And it's your turn again.
So the way the story affected me, and probably you can figure it out, but or the audience can figure it out, but I'll just go ahead and spell it out, is I realized that in my life, I had a facade of living, and people thought I was living one way, and that was my front yard, and the backyard, there was some weeds in there, and I was not being truthful to myself, and the habit of having 4 or 6 or 8 beers every night was basically not something I was proud of, didn't feel good about. And yet I kind of just thought that I was keeping it in check and it was okay. And it was nothing wrong with that. I grew up thinking that, parties were fun time and alcohol was always related to it. And I like to have fun. And so I thought, let's have fun and let's have more fun. And then, so there was like this idea of fun, and then you get into the working world and you start thinking about, like celebrating the successes of the day or drowning your sorrows if things don't work out so well for you. So you had like a built-in excuse to consume, every day. Was either good or bad, but either one was okay. Anyway, I realized that when I finally heard the story of the front yard and the backyard, I was like, oh my gosh, my backyard's not I need to be able to invite people into the backyard and feel good about it. So,
and that's where all the parties happen. I mean, the backyard is our kitchen. How many great parties we've been to where the best party of the whole freaking time is right there in the kitchen? And that's literally the backyard. But that's the hardest part. The kitchen's the hardest room to keep clean because that's where everything happens. And where the story got the most poignant for me was I was doing an intervention with a family, and the family was a named family where I was living. You just said their family name, and everybody knew exactly who they were. And their front yard was just beautiful because it was like that's where everybody goes for Christmas. They drive that neighborhood for the Christmas light show where they're getting ready right now. They've been spending a whole month getting ready for the Christmas season because the front yard is huge. I'm sure the backyard was a mess, but that's what happens is we get so caught up in that facade. And we forget because I like looking good. I look good in white and I look good in a sweater. So that's what I wore today. But, I'm in my blue jeans. I'm in my rotted out, Keen shoes, so down below ain't so pretty. But that's the hard part is learning how to get the symmetry going and keeping our life good. Because I'm like you, man. I'm gregarious. I'm outgoing. I am spontaneity, big time. But the hard part is bringing the continuity to life. And I got to be ready. And, getting ready for today, I spent an extra 15 minutes just preparing myself meditation-wise of learning how that I have to be present. I have to be able to hear Steve. I have to be able to hear what he's saying so that I stay with him and follow the lead. And that's not an easy thing to do because, I have a higher power in my life that I want in my life. And that higher power is going to want to go right to the kitchen, right to the backyard and say, okay, how attentive are you being to what I've provided you? Because all the gifts I get come from being attentive. All the gifts I get come from being available to the people around me. So, front yard, backyard was getting, taking down the fences, allowing people as they drive by to see how bad off that backyard really is.
Yeah, that's well, I want to just say, I just want to say thank you for giving me that gift. And I was ready. It wasn't like what you said, like took a guy who wasn't ready and converted them to be ready, but it was perfectly timed because I was ready and I needed to hear something like that. And I needed that mirror held up, and you did it. And then, that same experience tightened our friendship. And we, that first year, as I was going through the process, you were there to, to help mentor me and to, we didn't talk all the time, but we kept in certainly closer touch that first year than we did since then, because you were like the guy who it was okay for me to adopt an alcohol-free lifestyle and go, hey, this is who I am, and I feel good about it, and actually life is much better. So,
and it was hard because I went through the same thing you went through, because I was in my early 20s when I stopped drinking and doing other things I shouldn't have been doing. But all my friends did all that stuff all the time, and they got really frustrated with me because I was no longer doing that. But it came, I started coming up with some cute little jokes, because there was a judge in our town named W.W. Leslie. And one of the last times I saw W.W. Leslie was, Joe Lair, every time you're in front of me, it's because you've been at the Rock and R, you've been at TJ's Cannery, you've been drinking. Maybe if you didn't drink, we wouldn't see each other. And it was like, oh, dang, that might be true. But I didn't care. I liked more, like you were talking that earlier. You bring me more. So I started out with these little, Miller ponies that were like 8-ounce Miller bottles. And I would drink 4 or 5 of those. But then I went into the Munsters, the big cans. And that's where I kept on drinking, because I just switched how I looked at things, because I wanted more, because it took more. And so people would ask me what my drug of choice was. And it's more, whatever you got, I'll take more. I didn't care. I did not care. But I finally did care, because I got tired of getting beat up all the time. And if you don't punch the 300-pound, 600-pound monkey in the nose, it doesn't fight you. So I just stopped punching the monkey, and it got better. But that's okay.
I've since learned that the body, from my own experience of going through really kind of a withdrawal, I realized that there was like a mental addiction, but there was also quite a bit of a physical addiction where, like 5 o'clock came and, your body is like, okay, it's time to, fuel yourself up and give what you've been giving me, on a regular basis. And so then you start thinking, well, maybe I'll just moderate and maybe I'll just quit tomorrow, and going through that whole thing. So there's really 2 pieces to overcoming in my mind. There's like a very real mental portion, but there's also that physical part that kind of keeps you locked in. And it was like I said, a month afterwards, I noticed some things happening physically. And then like a few months later, when I went, oh my gosh, I'm sleeping good at night. That was kind of the picture. That was the one that went, oh, this is a much healthier lifestyle. I like this better.
Yeah. And that's what happens. I wish that Miller beer was my problem. I wish that, cocaine was my problem. I wish marijuana, if I stopped doing those things, that was no longer a problem. I wish that was true, but it's not. It was the solution to how I handled life and how I handled my problems. My problems were always there. I was not learning how to handle my emotions. It's my shortcomings and defects. Is part of the 12 steps of recovery I take people through, is coming to terms with there is a power greater than us. It's not us. I used to wear a shirt all the time that said, there's 2 basic truths. There is a God, and it's not you. And, it's just learning how we as human beings have to handle we're with people. And that's like when I prayed and meditated this morning, is let me follow Steve's lead. And you led me into this, which is we have to be willing to be present with our feelings and acknowledging what's going on. Because I didn't know what anger was. I thought anger was someone goes through the window. That's not anger. That's rage. I had to learn how, oh, I'm getting irritated. Oh, this fly is bothering me. Oh, you stepped on my toe. That hurt. That frustrates me. I had to learn all those little steps that go into anger. I had to learn what love was. I thought love was, whatever. But I love holding my wife Tanya's hand. That is incredible connection for me. When I see my daughter or my sons, I smile, and it's like that's love. That's the beginning. And it's just learning how we handle these things. And got me going was like you said. I had to learn that Miller beers was what I used to handle. I got embarrassed today by my friend at work. I got hurt by what they said to me on a snide comment, and I stuffed it. Just things were starting to happen to me, and I didn't have tools to handle those feelings, so I just stuffed them. And the Miller, the cocaine, the marijuana, the speed, all that stuff being ingested pushed it down further, so I didn't have to deal with it, and it made me feel better, and I could go on. But you're right, detoxing is a really tough thing, but it awakens what's going on inside of us, so we can start to handle those things better and not go back, because they want us to go back really bad.
One of the things I recognized this past year as I began really, let's just say a couple years ago it started, when I decided I was going to leave Montana, because I felt like, okay, it's time for me to go back out in the world. And the reason why I moved to Montana was to go through a personal journey of healing. The whole Gump thing was a wonderful experience, but it deepened the facade that I had lived my whole life with. And then I got to live as this character that everybody loved for the next 15 years. And so as I went to Montana, I wanted to kind of figure out who Steve was. And that was not as easy of a project. It's like you kind of think, okay, I'll just roll back like 1 or 2 layers and figure this out. Well, turns out it's like quite a few layers, and the first few layers do not come off easily. They're the resistant, they're the stubborn ones.
And that's what gets into, it's like stubborn. I knew when we started talking about this about three weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, I would have to go through things too, because it's like learning about front yard, backyard is really hard, because I have to go be willing. There's an old saying that I can't remember where it came from, but it's like, you can't lead where you will learn. You can't exhibit things that you're not willing to look at. And if I'm going to start talking about this stuff, I got to be willing to look at all the ugly facets of who I am. And some of those still today are ugly. And it's, coming to terms with how I'm 6'2". Well, I used to be 6'2". I'm like a little over 6 feet now because gravity works. But, I'm a big guy still, and I can make things happen if I want to. But I'm still, when I look at me, and I'm still that scared little kid in the corner sucking my thumb, because that's who I am intrinsically, is I am a scared guy. But if I start talking about backyard, I got to look at how much fear still governs who I am. The facade of me is willing to walk into a crowd and start shaking hands, but the little guy inside of me is scared to death. How do I handle that fear? I love people, and if you look at me crooked, it's like, oh God, what's wrong? What did I not do right? I got a booger hanging off my nose. I didn't comb my hair. It's just those things that go on. It's like, I have to understand, it's not me. It's what goes on inside of them. And I got to quit reacting to that. But it's fun. Go ahead, Steve.
There we go. I'm adjusting things. I have to relearn how to do this every couple of days, Joe. Sorry about that. Hey, yeah. So for me, what's been funny the last couple of years is I can kind of see things a little more clearly as I look back on them, right? But as you said, we're still going through the process of like unraveling this, beast of the last many years. I found that as I look back on it, all I was able to at best do in my life when I was keeping my front yard clean and the backyard was a bit of a mess, all I really could do is like take 2 steps forward and 1 step backward, and those were good days. And on average days, it was like really like 1 step forward, 1 step back. So it was just treading water. It wasn't, actually getting anywhere. The front looked good, but the back was a mess. And some days you could get a little bit further down. Like, I always felt like, in my case, I always felt like I was moving forward, but it was really kind of at a snail pace. It wasn't really, there was no big leaps going forward. And then when I made the decision 4 years ago to just take control of this portion of my life, because we have other portions that we still are going to work on, I now see that like that was holding me back. I didn't realize that I was, at best, I was going 2 steps forward and 1 back every single day of my life. And I can guarantee, or I can almost guarantee, that I would never have been brave enough to start this show in August because I wasn't ready to, like when you're just going 1 step forward, 1 step backward on a day, you don't have enough energy to take on something new and something big.
Excuse me. It's, learning how is one of the things I pray for every day, and I use this higher power that has been given to me because I'm so grateful that I'm not alone. I'm scared. And it's like, okay, I know if I'm willing to just be a channel, be some kind of conduit that is going to be allowing people to learn and go through life, and just be able to sit with them. It's like, to get to meet you just because of a story was just, when I shared front yard, backyard, I had no idea what that was going to do for you, but it did. But it was like the best reward was I got to be a friend of Steve. And that's the best thing in the world, because it's like we get to walk together. We're not better than each other. We're not worse than each other. We're just fellow zonkers trying to get down this walkway of life without really hurting anybody or being hurt. And that's a great thing. And it's like when I was, praying this morning, was like, okay, who is going to be listening? I have no idea. What are they going to hear from us? I have no idea. But I get to hang out with my friend Steve for 45 minutes or more, and we get to talk about my favorite subject, which is the ethereal. We have no idea, but to get over our fear and to start doing this thing, Gumption Nation is awesome because of what you get to broadcast out to the whole world. And you have no idea what's going to happen, but there is a lot of fear and trepidation, but we get to learn how to handle that as we go through life. And there's nothing better. There's nothing better. And one of my favorite stories, and I think I told you this one too, was I was working with a guy in a treatment center one time, and Rufus, God bless him, was adamant. He only drank 1 glass of what they call like New York iced tea or something like that. And he, in his mind, was a little tumbler. Well, his family during family week brought in his glass, which was, 44 ounces of, bourbon every day. That's a lot of bourbon going into a guy. Yeah. And that's what he was drinking every day. And that's what happens to us. We start to self-delude. And if we're not paying attention to those around us and saying, Steve, I gave you the exact right that you gave me, which is if you see something going on inside of me and you say, Joe, look at that, please. And if I don't look at it, that's on me. And, my friends have done that for me before, where it's, I had to do some serious recalibrating of who I am about 2 years ago. It was an ugly mess. I had to be willing to look at it. And maybe next time we talk, we'll talk about that. But right now, it's just so raw. There's no real way for me to talk about it. But it's like my friends held up the mirror, and I got really scared. And I went to my wife and said, hey, this is what's going on. But it's how we handle our our difficulties. It's not pretty, and sometimes it's ugly, but we get to handle it as best we can.
I in the intro that I prepared, I said that for some unexplained reason we stayed connected, and I kind of hesitated on that because on the unexplained part, because the explanation wasn't obvious at that time, but it became obvious a couple of years later, and you know, there was some kind of a connection that we made, and yet it took a few years for it to kind of become obvious. And one of the things that I'm learning is that, you know, every connection, you know, can allow for that to happen if we just allow it to happen, as opposed to try to force things to happen. And, you know, what maybe talk about, you know, from the mentoring you've done, you know, what's the difference between forcing and allowing that, you know, and the results that come from both?
One thing that had to happen was a friend of mine named Derry is always talking about this. And, you know, when you're playing chess alone, it's really boring. But if you're playing chess with another person, there's interaction there. But the real hard thing is, if you move your chess piece, you have to wait for the other person to move their chess piece. And sometimes that can take a moment, and sometimes that can take years. But it's me learning how to self-govern, because I don't want to be moving people's chess pieces, because it's not for me to tell you, Steve, you know, your breath stinks, go brush your teeth. You know, I can say, yes, Steve, you know, your breath stinks, but it's up to you to either get a mint or go brush your teeth. But I can't be your babysitter. And my favorite part of the story of the Good Samaritan, I mean, how many people, you know, a lot of people know the story, but the best part of the Samaritan is that person that found the Samaritan in the ditch was willing to just say, hey, look, I've been in this ditch. I know a way out of this ditch. Do you want out of the ditch? And the person had to say, yeah, I want out of the ditch, please. Okay, let's go. And they went together. But it's also that willingness to say, hey, you know, I will put you up. I will let you take care of yourself. These people in this room are going to help you. You have to be willing to get that help. And if you're not willing to get the help, I'm going to be gone. It's up to you to do it. And that's the other part I had to be willing to do, was let people be who they are, because I can't decide who you are for you. That's not my choice. That's your choice. But it's, you know, learn the lessons you want to learn from the stories that you learn, and then share them with me, please, because I want to know. But it's, you know, in my life, yeah, I've talked openly about my higher power, but I have people in my life that are devout, broadcasting loudly atheists. And that's awesome, because it's not for me to make them into Christians or make them into Muslims or make them into Buddhists or make them into something else. It's their job to be who they are. And all I ask is that you be the best you can be, you know, because that's up to you.
I appreciate the, you know, what you've done in being that Samaritan for people. You were certainly that for me. I never felt, I don't even know that I'm sure that over the years that we knew each other, I was aware of your sobriety, but it wasn't something that you ever preached or even, you know, suggested to me. It wasn't anything we ever discussed until it really, I don't think it was ever anything we discussed until after, you know, I made the connection of the front yard, backyard, and wanted to make the change myself. And it was at that point when I think I reached out and said, Joe, I decided that I'm going to not drink alcohol anymore, and it's no longer part of my life. And it was then when we only had the conversation. So you have been doing this work for, you know, 30, maybe 40 years, and yet it wasn't something that you were out there preaching and trying to convert people. You were, but I felt like you are a very safe person to come to when I finally made the decision and the choice. And there were a lot of people in my life that were, from a different side of the fence in terms of that it wasn't safe for me to go and tell them folks about, this decision, because they would go, you don't have to do that. You don't have any. It's not a big deal,
And that's the hard part is when it's, there's a in my town where I live still today, I grew up, was they call it BER. It's Bermuda Triangle, and it's 3 bars that are in the same block. And if you ever get stuck in Bermuda Triangle, you're in trouble. And when I was a kid, that was me. I loved living in Bermuda Triangle. And my favorite part was if I got to be there with my brothers. I have an older brother and a younger brother. It was the best night ever, because it was like that night's going to jail. Because it's like, the three Lair boys are going to get together, and a lot of fun is going to happen, but it's going to be a lot of excitement, and the police are going to get called, and I'm the big one, so I'm going to jail. And I didn't care, because going back to jail in those days was pretty simple. But it's just when I finally, got to a point where I had to stop, it was all of my friends, every single one of them was involved in that lifestyle just as much as I was. And it was like, it was like walking through a swamp. I mean, I was almost up to my hips in that swamp where I could barely move, but I had to leave. And getting away from that took a lot of work. I mean, you're up hips in the swamp. Movement doesn't happen fast, but they really wanted me back, because it was like, no, don't leave. Because if I left, they had to look at themselves. And that's what happens is people start to change. Other people that are involved in your vortex of your life, they have to start looking at them. If you're leaving, your mirror is really bright and it's really shiny and it's scaring them to death. And that's where I lose a lot of people. They get stuck in it, because it's like I tell them, man, you're on this train and you're going through life on that train. And you and your family and everybody that's with you is on that train with you. And unfortunately, you're going to have to kick some of those people off that train. And when you're kicking them off the train, don't get caught as they're going off the train, because you're going to go with them. And you're going to be pulled off the train. And then we have to start all over again. And sometimes, they get pulled off the train and they get bloodied up, they get messed up, and they get that. But that's part of the journey. And it's scary. And, that's why I always remind people, it's not the beer, it's not the cigarettes, it's not the food, it's not the whatever you're addicted to, the spending, the credit card. It's inside. Who you are is a mess. And you get to start cleaning that mess up.
I think it's self-love. Is what it ultimately comes down to, because we somehow don't feel worthy enough. We don't feel good enough. And so the alcohol or the drugs or whatever the means of not facing that is coming to the acceptance that I'm okay. And I've always been okay, but somewhere along the line, I started doubting that. And, maybe some friends or a parent said you were dumb, or some kind of thing happened, and you got it into your mind that I'm not good enough. And then you want to prove yourself. And yet that there's no way to prove it. And so medicating and forgetting it and numbing it is becomes the answer. And then that becomes the habit, and then it becomes the lifestyle, and then breaking that, trend is what the hard part is. So, self-love, and that's a tricky one, because we're taught that, you don't want to be, egotistical and, full of yourself. And so what's that fine line between just accepting yourself and not being involved in the ego, and then, being someone who's, full of himself in the kind of a false way? So it's a
That's
challenge.
the hard part. It's a challenge. And it's like, you've heard me say this story, like, I don't know how many times I've told you that story. The very last time I drank alcohol and used all the drugs I could use, I ended up very, very sick. And when I got to my first, what was called an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, this old lady, who I've grown up with, I've known her since I was 8 years old, 9 years old, was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she was a good friend of my parents. And she took out her teeth, God bless her. She had really, and she looked at me with the most compassion I still today, whenever I tell this story, I see Betsy in those beautiful, beautiful blue eyes looking at me with incredible love. And she looked at me and she said, "Honey, are you through? Are you finished? Have you had enough?" And just the look on her face was like, "Yes, Betsy, yes." And she said, "But Joe, you are this precious child of the Most High. You are an inheritor of his kingdom." That line I never really share a lot about, because that's the trick, is like you said, coming to terms with, we are that precious child of his Most High. We are an inheritor of that kingdom, but we're also friends, companions, fellow travelers. Sure, I don't get along with everybody because some people just drive me absolutely insane, just like I do. There are people that I make nuts, and I can see them hundreds of miles away. I know when they arrive in my doorstep, I'm going to bug you. And that's the trick, is to learn how to not let that kind of discord ruin what's going on inside of me, because that's what happens every so often. Like you said, I start to stuff it. I start to try to medicate it. I try to make it not be so noisy, because that means I have to work on me. I have to learn how to get along with the ones that bug me the most, because they're the ones that are going to teach me the most. But it's learning how to moderate that ego of mine. Because, I'm sure everybody understands the ego spelling, ego means easing God out, because then we become God. And I'm not God. I'm not the guy that decides what happens. That's somebody else's job. I'm just in management, which is, hey, let's get along. Let's learn how to work together and learn how to be friends with each other, so that we don't rub each other so raw and make each other so irritated and make each other so frustrated. And that's learn how to do maintenance. And I love working with business leaders, because it's like having the strength to say, hey, you're 5 minutes late again. What is going on in your life that you're consistently 5 minutes late to work? What can I do for you to help you get here earlier, so that you're not always late? Those conversations aren't easy. Oh, they're only 5 minutes late, but they work really strong. But I'm sorry, man. Work starts at 8. If you're not there, there's a problem. If you're leaving 10 minutes early, there's a problem. And it's having those conversations that are hard. You need to have enough ego to have those conversations, but you need to know that you're not God. You can't control the outcomes. Either they come to work on time, or you have to move them on. Or is there something you can do to help them, in their life? But it's hard. It's hard.
Joe, I appreciate your joining us. We're at the top of the hour, so we'll wrap up in the next minute or two. I want to just say, though, thank you for holding up the front yard, backyard story, which you didn't know it at the time. You were just sharing, the story that has been part of your life for a long time, and yet it was the perfect mirror that I needed at that time. And you were really one of the first people that I reached out to when I made the decision, and I knew I needed some support. And you weren't the only one, but there were a few, and you were one of them. And it really was that front yard, backyard story that, was the tipping point. There was 20 years worth of stuff, and there were many attempted changes. And, I was getting closer and closer to the tipping point, in hindsight and retrospect, but that was the story that tipped it over and made the dominoes begin to fall, in a different direction than they had been falling for 25 years, really, before that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so thank you very much. I really appreciate that. What's your last message on this? Anybody who needs some help in their life or wants to make a change?
The best thing is get a friend that holds up that mirror and get with them, and then be willing to share openly what's going on. One of the favorite quotes of my life is, if you argue for your limitations, they're yours. And, it's quit arguing for those limitations, be willing to grow, and please be the best you can be. So quit arguing for those limitations. And Steve, thank you for being who you are. Thank you for letting this old guy in Montana be with you. You're an awesome, awesome man. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I sure appreciate your being here today. And we'll bring you back sometime next year, and we'll figure out another story to tell, or we'll continue this conversation. I would like that.
Well, blessings to you and your family, and have a great holiday.
Thank you, Joe. Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you.
Wow. So thank you, Joe Lair, for joining us this morning. That was therapeutic for me, because the front yard, backyard story was that tipping point in my life. Now I was ready. There was several years worth of getting ready and attempts and different things. But for whatever reason, when I heard Joe tell the front yard, backyard story, it just was that perfect mirror. And I just was simply able to get that, hey, my front yard looks good and my backyard doesn't look so good. And it was as simple as that. And then I'm like, do I want to keep living that way, or do I want to make a change? And of course, I made the change, and hey, here we are 4 years later. So grateful. And thank you, Joe, again for joining us today. All righty. We're going to wrap up tomorrow. Shaman Isabella comes back, and we'll get into the metaphysical again with Shaman Isabella. Nikki Roscoe, we're going to do some NLP talking on Wednesday. And then Thursday, Friday, we're going to take off for Christmas. And then Brandon Schaefer is going to spend the whole time with us on Monday. Normally comes in for that short segment on Tuesday. Monday, he's going to spend the entire day with us. And then Della Fatui, she does 5 different broadcasts, regular broadcasting, kind of like this show, but she's got 5 different shows that she's doing. And we'll talk about, what she's doing in her life, and a very fascinating story. So that's next week. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day. Let's see, we've got Bettina checking in as usual from Seattle. Thank you, Bettina. We appreciate you. And, she says that she enjoys the front yard, backyard analogy. Yeah, it's powerful. It's so simple, and yet it works. So grateful to Joe Lair for joining us today. That is it. I'm going to say goodbye. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow with Shaman Isabella and the Metaphysical.